Hello friends, welcome to a new chapter today. In this chapter, let us now learn about the fractures of upper limb. Okay, in the fractures of upper limb, we have the first fracture, which is the fracture of clavicle. Okay, what is clavicle? Clavicle is the most common bone to undergo fracture. Fracture is clavicle. Okay, what is the most common site of fracture? That is medial 2/3 and lateral 1/3 junction is the most common site of fracture. Okay, now how are you going to treat this type of fracture? This type of fracture depends upon the displacement. If it is undisplaced, you don't need to do anything. You will have to just do observation and put figure of 8 bandage. Okay, so this is the figure of 8 bandage which you put. And if it is a displaced fracture, or if it is an open fracture, or if it is a multiple fracture, if it is displaced, open or multiple fracture, then you will have to undergo the surgery, that is open reduction and internal fixation. So if it is an undisplaced fracture, you can directly put a figure of 8 bandage. Okay, next, the next fracture is fracture shaft of humerus. So in this fractured shaft of humerus, what is the mechanism of injury of this fracture shaft of humerus? It is seen at high velocity injury. The mechanism of injury is high velocity injury. Then if you see here, see, this is the fracture shaft of humerus at the deltoid tuberosity. Okay. Now, what is the most common complication of displacement fracture? What is the most common complication? First, there will be displacement. Okay. Now, which fragment is displaced? The fragment with deltoid insertion is abducted. Okay. The most common complication of fracture shaft of humerus is displacement. See, this has the deltoid part, right? So, the part with deltoid tuberosity is abducted. Deltoid insertion is abducted. Okay. So, that is one thing which you see here, because the deltoid is used in abduction, right? So, the part with deltoid insertion is abducted. That is one thing. Next, what is the most common nerve injured here? The most common nerve injured in shaft of humerus is radial nerve. Okay, radial nerve injury is most common. And where is this radial nerve injury most common? It is most common in lower 1/3. And what is this sign called as? This is called as Holstein-Lewis sign. Okay, this injury to the radial nerve in the lower 1/3 is called as Holstein-Lewis sign. Okay, what is the treatment of choice in this case? In this case, the treatment of choice is closed reduction and POP application, plaster of Paris shaft application. Okay, next. Okay, how do you put a plaster of Paris application? Which cast do you put? You can put U slab or U cast, and you can also put a hanging cast in this situation. Okay. Then what is we have seen the most common nerve is radial nerve. If you were asked what is the most common vessel involved, that is injury to brachial artery is the most common vessel involved. See, if this closed reduction and plaster of Paris application is failed, then what should you do? Definitely you should go to open reduction and internal fixation. In such situation, you should do open reduction and internal fixation with either plating or surgical nail fixation. Now, in this open reduction and open reduction and internal fixation, what are the surgical indications? When there is an open fracture, you can do this open reduction and internal fixation. If there is any neurovascular injury, you should do open reduction and internal fixation, right? If there is non-union, even then you should do open reduction and internal fixation. What are the indications? There are mainly 3 indications, which are open fractures, non-union, and even neurovascular imaging techniques. Then you can do open reduction and internal fixation. Okay. Then if there is non-union, what is the treatment of choice? If there is non-union, like any other non-union, you should do bone grafting. Okay. So this is about the fracture shaft of humerus. The next fracture which is important is supracondylar fracture of humerus. So what is the mechanism of injury in supracondylar fracture of humerus? It is fall on the outstretched hand. Okay, what is it most commonly seen? It is the most common fracture which is seen due to fall in the outstretched hand, and it is most commonly seen in 10 years of age. Okay, this supracondylar fracture is of two types. One, we have extension type, second we have flexion type. In extension type it is posteriorly displaced, in flexion type it is anteriorly displaced. Okay, so what is most common among the extension type and flexion type? If you see, this extension type is most commonly seen in 90%, whereas the flexion type is most commonly seen in only 10%. Okay, this flexion type is anteriorly displaced, right, whereas the extension type is posteriorly displaced. Okay, now the question is, why is there an extension type of supracondylar humerus fracture? One, because if you see, this is the triceps muscle. 1 minute. Yeah, what is this muscle? This is nothing but triceps muscle. So because of this triceps muscle, it exerts a pressure, right, which is extension, right, it causes extension, triceps. So as a result, because of this posterior pull of the triceps muscle, there is extension which is seen. Okay, and even second important thing is because of the mechanism of action. Here mechanism of action is also hyperextended elbow occurs, right. Because of these two, there is extension type of injury which is most common, that is almost around 90% of the cases you can see extension type of injury being most common. Then next, if you see, among this extension type of injury also we have two types. One, we have posteromedial type of extension type of injury, and we have posterolateral type of extensor type of displacement. Okay, this posteromedial is more common than posterolateral, right. Next, if you see, what is the diagnosis? You should do X-ray. Okay, if you were asked one-liners, one is, what is the most consistent sign of fracture? Most consistent sign of fracture is tenderness. Okay, most pathognomic sign of fracture is abnormal mobility more than crepitus. Most consistent sign of fracture is tenderness. Most pathognomic sign of fracture is abnormal mobility more than crepitus. If we have failed to diagnose the fracture on X-ray, then we should do, then what is the investigation of choice? Investigation of choice is MRI followed by CT. Okay, then if in any cases, if the fracture is mixed on X-ray, then we call the fracture as hidden fracture or occult fracture. What is hidden fracture or occult fracture? In this, the fracture is mixed on X-ray, then we call it as hidden fracture or occult fracture. Okay, where is it seen? It is seen in all types of supracondylar fracture of humerus. You have seen this, you can see this occult fracture or hidden fracture. Okay, now this is fracture. Okay, in occult fracture or hidden fracture, we have a sign which is called as fat pad sign, which is seen on X-ray. On X-ray we see this sign called as fat pad sign, where you see translucent halo seen around the distal humerus. Here in fat pad sign, you see translucent halo which is seen around the distal humerus, that is seen in occult fracture or hidden fracture. Okay, that is called as fat pad sign. Okay, now then what is the treatment which you give? Here for the treatment, so for the treatment, what do? It is an orthopedic emergency. Remember that this supracondylar fracture of humerus is an orthopedic emergency. It is an orthopedic emergency. Because it is an orthopedic emergency, because there is increased chances of injury to the brachial artery, and that is the reason why it is an orthopedic emergency. So here you see, you will have to do a closed reduction with internal fixation along with K-wire placement is done in orthopedic, this orthopedic emergency. Okay, so you can do sorry, you can do closed reduction with internal fixation with K wires is done here, right? Now after 4 to 6 weeks you can remove the K wires. Then you can also do one more traction, that is Smith traction can be used, or Dunlop traction can be used in the supracondylar fracture of humerus. Okay, because there is increased chances of having brachial artery injury, so before you apply this either Smith traction or Dunlop traction, one important thing that you should definitely do is you will check for the radial pulse. Okay, and you will also check for the color of the skin. If this radial pulse and color of the skin is positive, then you will have to treat it. If this color of the skin is pale and if there is absence of radial pulse, okay, if you see those, then you should explore it. So based on the brachial artery injury findings, that is based on this, you will have to change your change, always you will have to be ready to change your plan of action. Okay, so this is one thing which is very important. So here you do closed reduction and internal fixation of K wires always. Now what is the most common artery involved in the supracondylar fracture? I have already said it is brachial artery which is involved. Then there is something called as 3-point relationship which is very important in supracondylar fracture of humerus. What is this 3-point relationship? So if you see this in the flexed elbow, in the what are the 3 points? First of all, the 3 points are mainly, we have medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle and olecranon are the 3 points which are involved here. If these 3 points in the flexed elbow, they form a triangle. Okay, and similarly in extended side, these 3 points will form a straight line. So in the flexed conditions, these 3 form a triangular, see this is 1, 2, 3 and they are forming a triangle. If in extended state, these 3 are forming a straight line, right? This is a straight line, right? They form a straight line. So that is 3-point relationship. In which fractures this 3-point relationship is preserved? See, it is preserved in fractures which are not involving this medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle or olecranon. If they are not involving, then easily 3-point relationship is preserved. So where is this 3-point relationship preserved? This 3-point relationship is preserved in supracondylar fracture of humerus, right? Next, where is this 3-point relationship disturbed? In which case do you see this disturbance of 3-point relationship? This 3-point relationship is actually disturbed in 3 fractures. One, lateral condyle of humerus, because here because of lateral condyle becomes fractured and as a result it separates from the rest of the fragment, thus the 3-point relationship is disturbed. Or it can be due to olecranon fracture, similar principle, right? Or it can be due to elbow displacement. Even when there is elbow displacement, this 3-point relationship has been displaced in elbow displacement also. Okay, so any fracture which is involving either medial epicondyle or olecranon or lateral epicondyle, that will result in disturbance of 3-point relationship, right? Now let us learn about the complications of the supracondylar fracture. Okay, what are the important complications of supracondylar fracture of humerus? The first complication includes non-union. Okay, because of non-union, which type of deformity you see? Because of non-union, you see cubital valgus deformity is seen. See, this is very important, you should not miss this point. Okay, if there is non-union, there is cubital valgus deformity which is seen. Okay, then if there is malunion, which type of deformity is seen? You see cubital varus type of deformity is seen if there is malunion, that is varus. See, if same problem, see, in both these are the complications of supracondylar fracture of humerus only, but if there is non-union, cubital valgus deformity is seen. If there is malunion, cubital varus deformity is seen. You should remember this very well. Okay, what is this cubital varus deformity called as? We call it as gunstock deformity, which occurs due to malunion of supracondylar fracture of humerus. Okay, what is most common? Is malunion most common or non-union most common? If you see, this malunion is most common. So you should remember that this malunion is most common, and this malunion causes cubital varus deformity leading to gunstock deformity. Right? Next, why is there this cubital varus deformity or gunstock deformity? Because of malunion, the lateral part of the bone, this is the lateral part of the bone, right? Here, due to malunion, this lateral part of the bone is growing bigger than the medial part of the bone, and as a result there is malunion, that is cubital varus type of malunion is seen. Then how are you going to remove? What is the treatment here? The treatment here is mainly to remove this wedge of the bone from the lateral side, and that is called as, there is a name for it, which is called as French osteotomy. So we do French osteotomy for cubital varus deformity. Right? Next. Right. Then what is the most common? Right. 1 minute. What is the most common nerve involved? Okay. Most common nerve involved in this is anterior interosseous nerve, followed by median nerve, followed by ulnar radial nerve, followed by ulnar nerve. Okay. What is the most common artery involved? Most common artery involved in this syndrome is brachial artery. Then in supracondylar fracture of humerus, there is increased incidence of compartment syndrome. Now, why is there compartment syndrome? See, whenever there is supracondylar fracture of humerus, there is massive bleeding, and because of this bleeding, if there is injury to if there is injury to vessels, there is bleeding, or else there is massive swelling due to injury to small micro arteries and arterioles. Even due to that, there will be bleeding, and because of that, there will be formation of swelling. Okay, because of this swelling which occurs initially, this swelling will occlude the venous drainage. Okay, because this swelling is present, what does this swelling do? This swelling, first and foremost, it will occlude the venous drainage, and as a result, venous drainage is stopped. Now, if the venous drainage is stopped, there is no drainage of blood, but still the blood is coming from the arteries, right? So, because of that, there is increased swelling of hands, forearm and hand is more, it increases, and slowly the pressure between the muscle layers also increases because of accumulation of water or fluid. Accumulation of fluid causes pressure between the layers of muscles, and that will cause increased compartment syndrome, compartment pressure, and this increased compartment pressure is called as compartment syndrome. Okay, what happens if there is compartment pressure increase? Later, in later stages, even the arteries and arterioles get occluded, and because of that, there will be ischemia to the muscles of the forearm. Okay, which muscle is the first muscle to go through ischemia in the forearm? The earliest muscle to undergo ischemia is flexor digitorum profundus. Okay, we have said about the compartment syndrome. Very good. Now, when do we call something has compartment syndrome, and what is the normal compartment pressure? Normal compartment pressure is present at less than 10 millimeters of Hg. Normal compartment pressure is less than 10 millimeters of Hg. If the pressure, compartmental pressure, increases to more than 30 millimeters of Hg, then we call it as compartment syndrome. So you should definitely remember, if more than 35, it is compartment syndrome. If it is less than 30, then it is normal. Okay, that is one thing which you should remember. Then what about the clinical features? If you see clinical features, the main clinical features are 5 P's. That include, first, pain to passive stretch. The patient has pain to passive stretch. On passive stretching, the patient has pain. Now, because of blood supply lost, okay, there will be pallor, and because of damage to nerves, there will be paresthesias. Compression of nerves causes paresthesias. compression of artery causes pulselessness. Because of paralysis of muscles or ischemia of muscles, there will be paralysis. Those are the main clinical features that you see. There is a test which can be done in compartment syndrome. What is that? That is called as positive stretch test. Okay, what is this positive stretch test? Positive stretch test is disproportionate pain on passive stretching. When you do passive stretching of the limb involved in compartment syndrome, this shows lot more pain. Okay, disproportionate pain or exaggerated pain is seen on passive stretching. Actually, this is diagnostic and earliest to occur. Among all the other signs, this is the earliest sign to occur. So this passive stretch test is very, very important. You should remember this for sure. Okay, next one-liners, some one-liners. Now, what is the most common site of compartment syndrome? Most common site of compartment syndrome is mainly the posterior compartment of leg, followed by deep flexors of forearm. Most common site is posterior compartment of leg, followed by deep flexor of forearm. What is the most common site of compartment syndrome in children? In children, it is most common in deep flexor of forearm. Okay, most common site of compartment syndrome overall is posterior compartment of leg more than deep flexor of forearm. Most common site of compartment syndrome in children, it is deep flexor of forearm. Then how are you going to treat this compartment syndrome? For this compartment syndrome, first you will have to remove the cast. Okay, and pain, it cannot be controlled by analgesics. Okay, so the first and foremost thing is you should remove the pain and remove the cast. And what is the treatment of choice? Treatment of choice is you should do fasciotomy. This fasciotomy is mainly done to relieve the fascia. Okay, relieve the pressure, and to release the deep fascia, we do this fasciotomy. Now, what are the indications of this fasciotomy? The indications of fasciotomy include when the pressure is more than 30 millimeters of Hg, then you can do fasciotomy. If there is neurovascular compromise, then fasciotomy should be done. If it is associated with paresthesias, you should do fasciotomy. Why paresthesias you should do fasciotomy? Because paresthesias indicate that there is some nerve compression which might lead to complete nerve damage. We don't want to lose the nerve or any vascular structures, and as a result, whenever there is paresthesias or neurovascular compromise, we do fasciotomy. Okay, next complication which is seen here is Volkmann's ischemic contracture. So if in any case, if any person or if any doctor finds difficult and he could not diagnose the compartment syndrome, so compartment syndrome is missed. Whenever there is missed compartment syndrome, there is ischemia of forearm muscle flexors which occur. Right, this ischemic muscles will now, these muscles undergo ischemia. These ischemic muscles will undergo necrosis, and because of this necrosis, this muscle is replaced by fatty tissue or fibrous tissue, this muscle is replaced by fibrous tissue, and this fibrous tissue undergoes contracture, causing flexor contracture deformity in the fingers. And this flexor contracture deformity which is seen in the fingers is called as Volkmann's ischemic contracture. Right, that is one thing which is important. Now, what is the most common muscle involved in this Volkmann's ischemic contracture? Most common muscle involved is flexor digitorum profundus. Now, what is the most common site of this Volkmann's contracture? That is deep flexor compartment of forearm. That too in the upper part of deep flexor compartment of forearm is the most common site of Volkmann's ischemic contracture. Now, what is the most common nerve involved in this Volkmann's ischemic contracture? That is anterior interosseous nerve more than, median nerve more than, ulnar nerve is most commonly involved in Volkmann's ischemic contracture. Now, how are you going to treat this Volkmann's ischemic contracture? The treatment of Volkmann's ischemic contracture, if you see, the treatment of Volkmann's ischemic contracture is, it depends whether based on the severity. If it's moderate, if it is first mild treat mild in severity. If the Volkmann's ischemic contracture is mild, then you can do turnbuckle splint can be done toward Volkmann's ischemic contracture. But if the injury is moderate to severe, then you should do an operation called as Max Page muscle sliding operation to release the contracture. In this, if you see, the proximal muscles are released and distal muscles are fixed. So this will release the contracture. So if the Volkmann's ischemic contracture is mild, then you will have to do turnbuckle splint. If it is moderate to severe, then you can do Max Page muscle sliding operation. Then the next thing is about myositis ossificans, right? This myositis ossificans is usually unilateral. And what is the most common site? The most common site of this myositis ossificans is in the elbow. Elbow is the most common site. Now, what is the most common muscle involved in this myositis ossificans? In the myositis ossificans, most common muscle involved is the brachialis or biceps is the most common muscle involved. Most common muscle involved is brachialis more than biceps. What is the most common history which you see in myositis ossificans case? That is history of massaging. So because of the history of massaging, rapid massaging, there will be deposition of calcium hydroxyapatite crystals in the soft tissues, and this leads to the bone formation in the soft tissues, causing myositis ossificans. Okay, now once you have learnt about myositis ossificans, how are you going to treat this myositis ossificans? The treatment of myositis ossificans depends upon the number of the duration of myositis ossificans. If it is just in 0 to 3 weeks, then you can just immobilize the limb. If it is 3 weeks to 1 year, then you will have to ask the person to do active exercises, not the passive exercises. You should ask the person to do active exercises. If the myositis ossificans has occurred in more than 1 year, then you can't do anything. Then the only thing is you should go and do surgery. No conservative management is required. If myositis ossificans has been after 1 year, then definitely you should undergo surgery. Okay, so this is very important. Next, what is the difference between myositis ossificans and this osteosarcoma? In myositis ossificans, the calcification is from outside to inside, whereas in osteosarcoma, the growth is from center to outside. That is the main difference. Next, the next fracture which is seen in the humerus is lateral condyle. Fracture lateral condyle of humerus is seen. What is this fracture lateral condyle of humerus? Here we have common extensor origin. Common extensor origin is the most common site of fracture of seen. Okay, this common extensor origin will cause displacement of this lateral condyle of humerus. So because this cause displacement of lateral condyle of humerus, what is the complication of this lateral condyle of humerus? This will lead to cubital valgus deformity. This cubital valgus deformity will lead to something called as tardy ulnar nerve palsy, which is very important in lateral condyle of humerus. In lateral condyle of humerus, there is something called as tardy ulnar nerve palsy, which occurs due to the cubital valgus deformity. This is very important. Then how are you going to correct this deformity? Obviously, you should do a corrective osteotomy for this deformity. Now, let us even learn about the classification of supracondylar fracture. So, how are you going to classify the supracondylar fracture? This supracondylar fracture classification is also called as Gartland classification. So, what do you see in this Gartland classification? It has 3 divisions. First, the first Gartland classification is, it is an undisplaced fracture. Okay, that is classification number first grade. First grade, the fracture is undisplaced. In second grade, there is displacement, but that is just a tilt. Okay, not complete displacement. Only a part of the bone has been tilted in class 2. Okay, in grade 3, you have complete posterior displacement is seen, and this posterior displacement can be of 2 types. One, we have posteromedial injury, and posterolateral type of displacement. Posteromedial displacement is most common, whereas posterolateral displacement is the most common site of muscle injury. Nerve injury. Nerve injury is most common in posterolateral displacement, right? But in posteromedial displacement, this is anyways most common. Okay. What is the X-ray view for supracondylar fracture called? The X-ray view for supracondylar fracture is called as Jones view. X-ray view for supracondylar fracture is Jones view. Then the next two fractures are, we have Monteggia fracture, and the second type we have Galeazzi's fracture. Okay, when do you call it Monteggia fracture? This is seen in the elbow joint, right? Here there is dislocation of radial head with fracture of upper end of tibia. There is dislocation of radial head with fracture of upper end of ulna is Monteggia fracture. This Monteggia fracture is fracture of necessity. What is the most common nerve involved in this Monteggia fracture? In this Monteggia fracture, the most common nerve involved is posterior interosseous nerve, which is a branch of radial nerve, is most commonly involved. The most important classification that we have to learn in this Monteggia fracture is called as classification of Bordeaux. What is this classification of Bordeaux? In this classification, it has 4 different grades. Okay, grade 1 tells us that the head goes anteriorly. Grade 2 tells us, which is most common, grade 2 tells that head goes posteriorly. Grade 3 tells that head goes laterally. Grade 4 says that both forearm fractures are present, along with radial head fracture is also present. There is both forearm head fractures are present, and also both bone forearm fractures are present, and also radial head dislocation is also present. That is 4th type. Okay, this is a fracture of necessity, as I have already said. So which surgery do you prefer in this? In this we do this Bell-Taussig procedure. The procedure is called as Bell-Taussig procedure, which we do for Monteggia fracture. Then we have Galeazzi's fracture. In this Galeazzi's fracture, it is mainly seen at the wrist joint, where there is fracture in the lower third of radius, and there is fracture of the lower third of radius, and there is also dislocation of the distal radioulnar joint. There is fracture of radial third of lower half of radius, and dislocation of distal radioulnar joint. Even this Galeazzi's fracture is also the fracture of necessity. Here if you see, the interosseous membrane is also damaged, and fibrocartilaginous complex is also damaged. Interosseous membrane is damaged and fibrocartilaginous complex is also damaged. Then you have the next thing, which is called as pulled elbow or traction injury, or also called as nursemaid elbow. We have something called as pulled elbow, traction injury, and nursemaid elbow. So this pulled elbow, traction injury, or nursemaid elbow, it is most common in children, that is in 1 to 4 years of age. It is seen in children with history of traction. Whenever there is history of traction, you will see this pulled elbow or traction injury or nursemaid elbow. Here if you see that there is 1 to 4 years child who cries after the after the father tries to lift his or her hand with the help of an arm. Then the child cries. That is pulled elbow. In this, if you see, this is the articular cartilage. The radial head has come out of annular ligament. Okay. In 85% of the cases, if you see here, the forearm is pronated and supination is lost. X-ray is mostly insignificant. So in this future, what you have to do, the treatment is, you will have to forcefully supinate the arm and you will have to flex the arm. The treatment is forceful supination and flex it to position the head back into the cavity, articular cavity. Okay, this is actually a self-resolving condition. The only thing is forced supination is the only thing that is required. So this is pulled elbow or traction injury. The next fractures are the fractures which are present in the lower end of the radius. So what are these fractures include? There are two fractures which are seen in the lower end of radius. One, intra-articular fracture. Second, we have extra-articular fracture. So what are the intra-articular fracture? Those which break at the joint are called as intra-articular fracture. Now what is the example of this intra-articular fracture? That is Barton's fracture is an intra-articular fracture of lower end of radius. And here, along with the intra-articular fracture of lower end of radius, there is also volar subluxation of the wrist is seen. Okay, this is an intra-articular fracture. So obviously it is a fracture of necessity, and you will have to fix this fracture by plating. For volar fracture, we have two types of Barton's fracture. One, we have volar Barton fracture, and second, we have dorsal Barton fracture. In volar Barton fracture, you will have to fix it with plating. Okay, so this is Barton's fracture. Then if you see the extra-articular fractures are those fractures which are away from the joint, and this fracture includes Colles fracture. Okay. Now let us learn a few points about Colles fracture. What is this Colles fracture? It is the fracture which is seen at the junction of metaphysis and the diaphysis junction, or also called as corticocancellous junction. It is mainly seen at the junction of epiphysis and metaphysis, or corticocancellous junction. Okay, what is the mechanism of action of this Colles fracture? Mechanism of action of this Colles fracture is fall on an outstretched hand with wrist in the dorsiflexion position. Here the patient falls on the outstretched hand with wrist in the dorsiflexion position is seen in Colles fracture. Where do you see this Colles fracture? This is most commonly seen in postmenopausal and osteoporotic women. Okay, this displacement is very important. So if you see in the Colles fracture, you actually see the displacement which is given the mnemonic slip, that is supination, S for supination, L for lateral displacement or lateral tilt, I for impaction, then P for proximal shift or proximal displacement. Okay, P for proximal shift or proximal displacement. Then we have proximal tilt and proximal angulation also. So this is the displacement which you see in Colles fracture, which is very important. Many questions have been asked on this. Then what about the treatment? The treatment of Colles fracture is you should do a closed reduction with POP cast application. Now what is the how do you apply this position of cast? The position of cast is correctly just opposite to the deviation of the wrist. So here the position of cast is, it is applied in pronation, palmar angulation, ulnar deviation, or extension of the cast, or sorry, it should be pronation, palmar angulation and ulnar deviation. So in this, the cast should be extended just below, till below the elbow joint. Okay, so this is about the Colles fracture. What is the most common complication which you see in Colles fracture? The complication which you see in Colles fracture is called as dinner fork deformity, which is a type of malunion. The most common complication is dinner fork deformity. What is the position of cast? Pronation, palmar angulation, ulnar deviation. What is the displacement you see here? The displacement is, you see supination, and then you see lateral displacement, lateral tilt, impaction, proximal shift, proximal displacement and proximal tilt and angulation. So this is about Colles fracture. Then the next type of fracture is, we have Smith fracture or reverse Colles fracture. We have something called as Smith fracture or reverse Colles fracture. So it is correct opposite to the Colles fracture. Here the bone will go anteriorly. So what is the displacement seen here? The displacement seen here include pronation, palmar angulation and ulnar deviation. Even here you should do a closed reduction and plaster of Paris application. Which position is the plaster of Paris applied? It's exactly opposite to the displacement. So it is applied by has supination, lateral displacement or lateral tilt, lateral angulation, impaction, proximal shift or proximal displacement or proximal tilt and proximal angulation. So that is the position of cast in Smith or reverse Colles fracture. Then we have what is the most common complication that you see here. The most common complication that you see here is malunion resulting in garden spade deformity. What is the displacement in Smith's fracture? Pronation, palmar angulation and ulnar deviation. What is the position of cast in Smith fracture? That is supination, lateral displacement or tilt or angulation, impaction, proximal shift or proximal displacement, proximal tilt or angulation. Now let us learn about the complications of Colles fracture. So what is the most common complication of Colles fracture? The most common complication is finger stiffness. What is the second most common complication? That is malunion, which is nothing but dinner fork deformity, which we have already seen. Then the next complication is it can cause rupture of extensor pollicis longus tendon. This rupture of extensor pollicis longus tendon most commonly occurs 2 to 4 weeks after injury. Okay, this can cause rupture of extensor pollicis longus tendon which occurs 2 to 4 weeks after injury. It also causes carpal tunnel syndrome as a side effect, a complication. Then we have one more complication which is called as Sudeck's osteodystrophy or complex regional pain syndrome. We have Sudeck's osteodystrophy and complex regional pain syndrome. What is this Sudeck's osteodystrophy or complex regional pain syndrome? Here we have a triad which is called as Lamfort triad. The triad which you see in Sudeck's osteodystrophy is Lamfort triad. What does this triad means? Here you have sympathetic overactivity is present, and because of this why is this sympathetic overactivity is present? It is because of a stimulus which is most commonly injury, and this sympathetic overactivity will causes response. So what response you see here? You see presence of red hot skin, that is red hot burning skin, which causes patch type of osteopenia or hyperemic osteopenia. Here the response is red hot burning skin which is seen in patchy osteopenia or hyperemic osteopenia. So this is about Sudeck's osteodystrophy which shows Lamfort triad. What does this Lamfort triad include? Sympathetic overactivity which is due to stimulus, and the response of this sympathetic overactivity is red hot skin, patchy osteopenia and hyperemic osteopenia. Then what are the types of regional pain syndrome? The types of regional pain syndrome include the following. There are two different types of regional pain syndrome. Okay, what are they? We have type 1 and we have type 2. Okay, in the type 1 regional pain syndrome, this include traumatic, post-traumatic. Type 1 regional pain syndrome is post-traumatic. It is due to post-traumatic causes which occurs in Colles fracture, which is nothing but Sudeck's osteodystrophy. In type 2 complex regional pain syndrome, it occurs in nerve injuries, usually median nerve injury, and this is called as causalgia. Okay, so these are the types of complex regional pain syndrome. Complex regional pain syndrome has two types, one type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is traumatic, post-traumatic, most commonly Colles fracture, especially that is called as Sudeck's osteodystrophy, whereas type 2 it occurs in nerve injury, usually median nerve injury, which is nothing but causalgia. Then we have scaphoid fractures. So what do you see in scaphoid fracture? Scaphoid fracture is the most common carpal bone to get fractured. Most common carpal bone to fracture is scaphoid fracture. Okay, what is the most common site of fracture? Most common site of fracture is the waist of the scaphoid bone. Okay, midpoint of waist of scaphoid bone is the most common site of the fracture. The blood supply of scaphoid fracture is from distal to proximal. Okay, what is the most common site of a scaphoid fracture in children? Most common site of scaphoid fracture in children is waist of scaphoid. See, in adults it is midpoint of waist of scaphoid, in children it is waist of scaphoid. What is the most common avascular necrosis in children? Most common avascular necrosis in children is associated with distal part of scaphoid. Remember, what is the most common avascular necrosis associated in children? That is distal part of the scaphoid. But what about the avascular necrosis in children, in adults? In adults, the most common site of avascular necrosis is osteonecrosis of proximal part of the scaphoid. This you should remember. See, overall most common site is the scaphoid waist, right? Once there is scaphoid waist fracture, the blood cannot flow from distal to proximal, and as a result there is proximal part of the scaphoid undergoes avascular necrosis or osteonecrosis. But in children, if you see, in children the most common avascular necrosis in children is in distal part of the scaphoid, right? Now, what is the most common sign? So you have seen all these. Now what is the most common sign? The most common sign which you see here is tenderness of anatomical snuff box. Okay. Then what is the treatment of choice? The treatment which you use is, there is a screw called as Herbert screw is used in the treatment. Okay, and we also use one more which is cast, which is called as glass hold cast. Okay, where thumb is put in line with the radius. So this is about the scaphoid fracture. Then after scaphoid fracture, the next type of fracture is we have scapholunate joint dislocation. So what is this scapholunate joint dislocation? What do you see here? In scapholunate joint dislocation, you will see a gap which is present between the scaphoid and lunate, and that is called as Thomas sign or Letterman sign. Okay, here you see a gap which is seen between scaphoid and lunate, that is called as Thomas sign or David Letterman sign. Then we have one more sign which is associated here, which is called as ring sign. So what do you see in the ring sign? In ring sign, the scaphoid here looks like a ring, that is ring sign. So this is scapholunate joint dislocation which you see. Next, the next dislocation in the upper limb which is important is the wrist dislocation. This wrist dislocation can be divided into two types. One, we have lunate type of dislocation. Second, you have perilunate type of dislocation. In lunate type of dislocation, the lunate bone is dislocated, not the other bones. So here lunate bone is dislocated. So you see on AP view there is pi sign, or you see spilled teapot sign or pot sign. Okay, on AP view you see either pi sign, or you also see spilled teacup sign. So that is in lunate dislocation. Then what about perilunate dislocation? In perilunate dislocation, lunate is in its position, but all the other bones except the lunate bone is dislocated. What is the most common nerve involved here? Here median nerve is the most common nerve involved in this wrist dislocation. Okay, next if you see, we have fracture of base of first metacarpal. So for the fracture of base of first metacarpal, it can be divided into two types. One, we have Rollando's fracture. Second type, we have Bennett fracture dislocation. So if you see in Rollando fracture, okay, here only the base of the first metacarpal has been fractured. There is no dislocation, and this is intra-articular fracture. Okay, so if you see in the Rollando's fracture, only the base of the first metacarpal is fractured. There is no dislocation and it is intra-articular. Whereas if you see the Bennett fracture dislocation, this Bennett fracture dislocation, here the base of first metacarpal is fractured along with the pull of the muscle. So here there is dislocation also along with the fracture. This is also in intra-articular fracture. Now we will see some more fractures here. Named fractures we have something called as nightstick fracture. What is nightstick fracture? Nightstick fracture is fracture of shaft of ulna, is called as nightstick fracture. Then boxer's fracture. What is boxer's fracture? Boxer's fracture is fracture of fifth metacarpal, is called as boxer's fracture. Then what is Chaufer's fracture? Chaufer's fracture is fracture of radial styloid, is Chaufer's fracture. Then next important thing is classification of fractures. Okay, fractures are classified. There are many important classification of fractures of upper limb. So in this we have Allman's fracture, that is Allman's classification for fracture clavicle. Campbell or Rosewood classification. See, Allman's classification for fracture of clavicle, Campbell or Rosewood classification for fracture of AC joint, okay, that is acromioclavicular joint. Neer classification for fracture of proximal humerus. This Neer's classification is also called as 4 parts fracture classification, okay, where the Neer has divided this proximal humerus fracture into 4 parts, that includes shaft fracture, head fracture, greater tuberosity fracture and lesser tuberosity fracture. Then we have Gartland classification for supracondylar fracture, Milch classification for lateral condylar fracture, Bardo's classification for Monteggia fracture, Frickman or Fernandez classification for Colles fracture. You should remember all of them, okay. Then we also have, along with these fractures, we have named splints also. We also have some named splints. So what are the named splints that we have, splints and tractions? So first we have the Cock-up splint, okay. Where is Cock-up splint seen? The Cock-up splint is seen in radial nerve palsy. We have Cock-up splint from radial nerve palsy. Radial nerve palsy, we have Cock-up splint. Then we have knuckle blender splint for ulnar nerve palsy. For ulnar nerve, we have knuckle blender splint. Then we have Volkmann splint. As the name says, this Volkmann splint is for Volkmann's ischemic contracture. Then we have aeroplane splint for brachial plexus injury. Then we have Dunlop or Smith traction for supracondylar fracture of humerus. Okay, then we have figure of 8 bandage for fracture clavicle. Then Velpeo and sling or Swathe, which is for acromioclavicular joint dislocation, more commonly than shoulder dislocation. Then we have gutter splint for pharyngeal and metacarpal fractures. So these are the named splints and tractions of upper limb. Then there are some more splints and tractions of upper limb, that is thumb spica splint. It is for scaphoid fracture or metacarpal fracture or for gamekeeper's thumb. We have sugar tongs, which is for humerus fracture. Then we have double sugar tongue, which is for elbow fracture. Then we have double distal sugar tongue or reverse sugar tongue, which is for distal forearm fracture. Buddy strapping is for pharyngeal fracture. And we have mallet splint, that is 6 to 8 weeks for avulsion of extension tendon from distal pharynx. We have mallet splint. So these are the different splints and tractions available. Then we have to see shoulder dislocation. So let us first learn about shoulder dislocation. So what do you see in shoulder dislocation? Here the shoulder joint is ball and socket joint, and this shoulder joint is actually stabilized by soft tissues, which includes muscles like biceps and deltoid, which are dynamic stabilizers, and this shoulder joint is also stabilized by static stabilizers, which include the labrum. Okay, this shoulder joint is the most mobile joint in our body. So if you see the one-liners, this shoulder joint is the most mobile joint. It is the most common joint to dislocate in the body. Shoulder joint is the most mobile joint and it is the most common joint to undergo dislocation in the joint. Here 50% of dislocations are shoulder dislocation. What is the most common complication of shoulder dislocation? Recurrent dislocation is the most common complication of shoulder dislocation. Then what are the types of shoulder dislocation? We have the following types of shoulder dislocation, nearly 3 types of shoulder dislocation. What are they? We have anterior dislocation, we have three types of shoulder dislocation, that is anterior dislocation, which is most common, seen in 98% of patients. Then we have posterior dislocation, then we have inferior dislocation. So if you see, anterior dislocation is ABR, that is it includes abduction, external rotation. ABR is abduction and external rotation. It is most commonly seen due to injury or trauma. Then we have posterior dislocation. Now in this posterior dislocation we have something called as adder. What is this adder? That is adduction in internal rotation is seen in posterior dislocation. This posterior dislocation most commonly occurs in epilepsy or electrical shock. Okay, then we have inferior dislocation. This inferior dislocation we see hyperabduction. In inferior dislocation, what do you see in inferior dislocation? We see hyperabduction. So what are the causes of this inferior dislocation? They are hyperlaxity is seen, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Marfan syndrome, osteogenesis imperfecta, lax joint or luxatio erecta. So in inferior dislocation you see hyperabduction, which include hyperlaxity, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Marfan syndrome, osteogenesis imperfecta, laxed joint or luxatio erecta. Okay, so these are the different types of shoulder dislocation and their causes. Okay, then we will see the tests, different tests which you see in shoulder dislocation. So we have anterior dislocation. For anterior dislocation we can do anterior drawer test, where the head is pushed out. In anterior drawers test the head is pushed out, and we also have sympathetic overactivity or restlessness is also seen. Okay, one we have anterior drawers test where head is pushed out, and second we have sympathetic overactivity or restlessness is seen. Then in posterior dislocation the test which you see is jerk test is seen. Okay, then in inferior dislocation the test which we do is sulcus test is done for inferior dislocation. So anterior drawers test and sympathetic overactivity or restlessness test for is seen in anterior dislocation. In posterior dislocation jerk test is seen. In inferior dislocation you see sulcus test. Okay, now what are the tests of shoulder dislocation? We will see in detail what are the names, okay, and how are they performed. So first test we call it as Dugas test. In Dugas test you will have to ask the patient to touch the opposite shoulder like this. Okay, you will have to ask the patient to touch the opposite shoulder, that is Dugas test. Then the second test is Hamilton rulers test. In this you will have to place a ruler on the lateral epicondyle such that this ruler touches the lateral epicondyle and acromion simultaneously in a dislocated shoulder. Okay, in a dislocated shoulder this ruler will touch the lateral epicondyle and also acromion joint simultaneously. This is called as Hamilton ruler test. Then the next test is we have Callaway test. What is this Callaway test? Callaway test is nothing but vertical axillary circumference is increased in dislocation. This is seen in Callaway's test. In Callaway's test the axillary circumference is increased in dislocation. Then we have the next test, which is Bryan's test. What is this Bryan's test? In this Bryan's test we have the lower axillary fold is observed from distance in dislocated shoulder. In dislocated shoulder we can observe the lower axillary fold. So that is Bryan's test. Okay, we have Hamilton ruler test, Callaway test and Bryan's test. Then if you see, the next type is for diagnosis. For confirmation we will have to do an X-ray should be done. For confirmation, all these are just theoretical tests, but if you see for confirmation you should do X-ray, and in the X-ray if head is present below the glenoid, then it is an anterior dislocation, that is head is present below the glenoid, and along with that if there is an abducted arm is present, if these both situations are present, then we can call it as anterior dislocation. And if head is present at the level of the glenoid, okay, and the arm is adducted, if head is present at the level of glenoid with adducted arm, then we call it as posterior dislocation. Okay, so this is how we diagnose the shoulder dislocation. Then now let us learn about the types of the shoulder dislocation, anterior dislocation. Now we will see some points about anterior dislocation. So what are the types of anterior dislocation? We have the subglenoid type of anterior dislocation, okay, we have subcoracoid type, then we have intrathoracic type of anterior dislocation. Okay, so we have three types. One, we have subglenoid type, we have subcoracoid type, and we have intrathoracic type of shoulder dislocation. Then what are the lesions which you see here? See here you can see this, what is subcoracoid, subglenoid, this is the glenoid cavity, this shoulder head is present below the glenoid cavity, then we call it as subglenoid shoulder dislocation. What is subcoracoid shoulder dislocation? Here this dislocated head is present below the it is present below the coracoid, and this is coracoid and it is present below the coracoid, and that is the reason why we call this as subcoracoid. And here in intrathoracic it is present little medially. Okay, now let us learn about the lesions of anterior dislocation of shoulder. So if you see what are the lesions which you see in anterior dislocation of shoulder, we have Bankart lesion. What is this Bankart lesion? Bankart lesion is anterior tear in the glenoid labrum is seen, that is seen in anterior dislocation. Okay, then we have Hill-Sachs sign. I'll show you all the X-ray images are also already uploaded in a lecture of X-rays in orthopedics, so please look into that for better understanding. Okay, in Hill-Sachs lesion we have posterolateral defect present in head of the humerus, that is Hill-Sachs lesion. And what is reverse Hill-Sachs sign? Reverse Hill-Sachs sign is anteromedial defect is present in posterior dislocation. So you should remember, in Bankart you see anterior tear in anterior dislocation, whereas in Hill-Sachs sign you see, that is Bankart, in Bankart you see anterior tear in anterior dislocation. Okay, then if you see in Hill-Sachs you see posterolateral, sorry, in Hill-Sachs you see posterolateral defect in anterior dislocation. This is also in anterior dislocation. Then what do you see in reverse Hill-Sachs? In reverse Hill-Sachs, if you see, in reverse Hill-Sachs we see anteromedial, this is correct opposite to Hill-Sachs. Hill-Sachs is posterolateral, reverse Hill-Sachs is anteromedial defect in the posterior dislocation. Okay, so these are the lesions which you see in shoulder dislocation. Then for Hill-Sachs lesion we will have to do a surgery which is called as Breslau-Letherget operation. So what is this Breslau-Letherget operation? Here we will shift the coracoid to the antero-inferior glenoid margin. Here in Breslau-Letherget operation we shift the coracoid to antero-inferior glenoid margin. Then we will see the treatment of shoulder dislocation. So if you see the treatment of shoulder dislocation, first we have conservative treatment and then we can do operative treatment. What is the conservative treatment? The conservative treatment is, first we should try closed reduction. If this closed reduction is failed, only then we should go to open reduction. So in closed reduction, what do you do in closed reduction? We do the following maneuvers. We have Kocher's maneuver which we do in closed reduction, where we will we will have the surgeon has to hold the arm of the forearm of the patient, and he will have to do traction and external rotation, adduction and medial rotation. He will have to do traction, external rotation, adduction and medial rotation should be done. Okay, then we have the next maneuver, which is called as Simpson's maneuver. Okay, what is this Simpson's maneuver called as? This Simpson's maneuver is based on the gravity assisted maneuver, where you will tie your limb to the weight in the ground. So based on the gravity, it itself undergoes reduction. So that is Simpson's maneuver. Then the third one we have Hippocrates maneuver, but this Hippocrates maneuver is not generally used. Okay, that is Hippocrates maneuver, where the surgeon puts his leg in the forearm of the patient and he applies the traction. Okay, so these are the closed maneuvers which you see in shoulder dislocation. Then what are the complications of shoulder dislocation? These are also very important, right? Complications of shoulder dislocation. What is the most common complication? The most common complication of shoulder dislocation is recurrent dislocation. Okay, why is there this recurrent dislocation? What are the causes of recurrent dislocation? It is because of the Bankart lesion and Hill-Sachs lesion. Bankart lesion is the most common cause in 90% of cases. Bankart lesion is the most common cause of recurrent dislocation. And for recurrent dislocation, what is the classification? There is a classification which is available for recurrent dislocation, and this is called as Masters classification, which is available for recurrent dislocation. So what is the most common complication? It is recurrent dislocation. What is the cause of recurrent dislocation? Is Bankart lesion, which is the most common cause, that is in 90% of cases it is associated with Bankart lesion and Hill-Sachs lesion. We have Masters classification for recurrent dislocation. Then we have one more type of dislocation, complication, which is axillary nerve injury can be there, but this is transient, and we have a sign which occurs over the lateral deltoid due to axillary nerve palsy, which is called as regimental badge sign is seen. Then we also have posterior dislocation. Actually, this posterior dislocation is generally missed in the x-rays, and also the doctor misses it, but this has a sign called as light bulb sign is present for posterior dislocation. So these are the main complications of dislocation of shoulder. Then we have the next the next type of dislocation. A few points about posterior dislocation also we will see. So if you see here in the posterior dislocation, there is a sign which is called as empty glenoid sign. The glenoid cavity most commonly is empty in posterior dislocation, and we call it empty glenoid sign. Sometimes we also see light bulb sign in posterior dislocation. Then what are the prognostic factors associated with shoulder dislocation? The prognostic factors associated with shoulder dislocation can be good and poor prognostic factors. Remember only one so that the other you can easily understand. See, poor prognostic factors we will remember. So what are the factors causing poor prognosis? One, atraumatic. If the fracture is atraumatic, or multidirectional or bidirectional fracture. If there is rehabilitation, that is inferior capsular shift procedure if we have to do, and if there is internal closure, if we have done internal closure. So these are the poor prognostic factors which are associated with shoulder dislocation. What are they? If the fracture has been due to atraumatic, it is not due to trauma, and if it is multidirectional, not just one direction but it is multidirectional, and if it is bilateral, the shoulder dislocation is bilaterally seen, and if there is capsular split, okay, or if there is internal closure, in such situations you will have to do the posterior, in such cases there is poor prognosis. Where is good prognosis? Simple, whenever there is traumatic injury, then if it is unidirectional, if there is Bankart lesion associated with it, or if there is surgical treatments are done, then we can have good prognosis. Okay. Then what about the next injuries? We have rotator cuff injuries. Okay, what are rotator cuff injuries? We have different muscles which are involved in rotator cuff. What are they? The muscles which are involved in rotator cuff are supraspinatus muscle, then comes infraspinatus, then we have teres minor associated with rotator cuff, and subscapularis muscle is associated with rotator cuff injury. You should remember the tests which are done. For supraspinatus, you do Joby's empty can test. For supraspinatus, which test do you do? Joby's empty can test is done. For subscapularis, we do lift off or belly press test. For subscapularis, we do lift off or belly press test. Infraspinatus and teres minor, we do horn blower sign. How we do these signs is not necessary. What is important is just the names of the signs are important. For infraspinatus and teres minor, we do horn blower sign. So what is the treatment here? The treatment is we will have to do arthroscopic repair is indicated in this rotator cuff tears. Okay, next. Then if this tear is irreparable, just think that we have learnt about rotator cuff tear. Then how are you going to approach to this rotator cuff tear is important. Think that if this tear is unrepairable, that is if it is chronic tear, then you will have to see the type of age, whether he is more than 70 years or less than 70 years. If the person is more than 70 years, then you can easily do a procedure which is called as tendon transfer is done. If this tendon transfer fails, then we do reverse shoulder arthroplasty and replacement. So it's simple. So if tear is irreparable, that is chronic tear, then if the person is less than 70 years, then you try to do tendon transfer. If this tendon transfer fails, then you will have to do reverse shoulder arthroplasty or replacement. If the person is more than 70 years, then you will have to do directly reverse shoulder arthroplasty and replacement. Okay. Now, what is the most common tendon tear in humans? The most common tendon tear in humans is rotator cuff. In the rotator cuff, the most common tendon is supraspinatus. Okay. What is the second most common tendon rupture in humans? That is teres tendoachillis tendon. In the tendoachillis tendon, so what is the clinical test done for tendoachillis tendon? That is Simmons-Thompson's test is done for tendoachillis tendon. What is it? Simmons-Thompson's test is done for tendoachillis tendon repair. Okay. Next, the last topic of this this lesson is about the stress fractures. So if you see, these one-liners are very, very important. What is the most common site of stress fracture in lower limb? That is metatarsal neck, second metatarsal more than third metatarsal most commonly. Then what is the most common site of stress fracture in upper limb? That is olecranon fracture is the most common stress fracture in upper limb. What is the most common site of spine stress fracture in spine? Pars articularis is the most common stress fracture in spine. What is the treatment of stress fractures? Treatment of stress fractures is to apply the cast and then ask the person to rest. Okay, so this is about stress fracture. So thank you guys for watching my lecture. In the next class, we will learn about some more injuries, especially injuries of the lower limb. Thank you.